Ladies and gentlemen, in just a moment you are going to hear the voice of a man who will tell you some tremendously important facts.
Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I'm so excited. We have Curtis Childs, the director of the channel Off the Left Eye. Curtis focuses on teachings from Emmanuel Swedenborg. Emmanuel Swedenborg was an amazing mystic that wrote some profoundly incredible revelations, almost like channeled like beyond that, that talk about the afterlife. We do have one episode on the channel where I read some Swedenborg, but if anybody has looked into Swedenborg, it's incredibly complicated and detailed. There's so much writing on it. So I was excited to get the opportunity to talk to Curtis, who's sort of an expert on this. So we can kind of get an abridged idea of Swedenborg's revelations and how it relates to the afterlife and a lot of the other stuff we talk about on the channel. So welcome to the Reality Revolution, Curtis.
Thanks so much for having me, Brian. And thanks for calling me an expert on this. I'll do my best.
Well, I would suffice to say there are few experts on Swedenborg, and the ones that are, it's still, I mean, this guy wrote so many books and was not just a mystic. He was discovering stuff scientifically. I was reading today, he was the one that discovered cerebrospinal fluid. He was a legitimate scientist. A lot of this he wrote in multiple different languages. He did an amazing job of interpreting the Bible and discussing his own visions of exploring the afterlife, heaven and hell.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your story. What got you into Swedenborg, and how you can kind of relate it to your own spiritual journey?
Yeah, Swedenborg is cool because he represents the confluence of the cutting edge of science and the cutting edge of spirituality, and as they were a couple hundred years ago. So he was writing in a lot of his spiritual stuff in the mid 1700s, but at the time, as you said, he was like a rock star scientist. When he would go to a new city, the papers would say, "Oh, Swedenborg is here." And he was, back then, science was a lot simpler than it is now. So one smart person could be at the forefront of a lot of different fields in it, which you couldn't do today. It's just too complicated. But he was absolutely everything you said, but it was also like an inventor and engineer. And he was the assessor of mines in Sweden's mining industry, which was like a global power. Sweden was a global power, and that was a key industry for them. So he was also in the Swedish government in the House of Nobles. So he was a Renaissance man. And I think that allows the window that he got into spiritual experiences to be something that's almost doesn't exist anywhere else. And for me, Swedenborg is kind of a hard sell to people. Like I go on YouTube and I start talking about Swedenborg. It's just weird. It's just weird. His name sounds weird, Swedenborg. People joke about Star Trek and is he like the Borg? And what even is that? He's old. He has and if you see pictures of him, paintings of him, he's got a curly wig on like they used to have.
Right.
It's just this weird sounding thing. Oh, and he was a scientist, but he also talked to spirits, but he was also like a Christian mystic. It's just a hard combination of flavors to swallow, but he has not changed my life is a total understatement. That I go back to his material as the bedrock for like everything I do when I'm on my game, like when I'm out of my ego and I'm thinking about life through the way that I would aspire to think about it. I can't oversell his importance to me. And this is, I've had, Swedenborg has been around my whole life for me. My parents were reading Swedenborg. I knew it was something, but I didn't see a ton of personal value in it for me until I started to get depression. I had a lot of depression and anxiety when it really started when I was like 18. I mean, I had some little tendencies before. I was a little bit, obsessive compulsive, where you have to do things multiple times. I had a little bit of that. If I look back now, I can see how I was developing that. But when I got to be 18, which I think is a period at which a lot of people struggle with mental health stuff, it just seems to be a difficult period in life. But I started to crash in a lot of different ways. And I had these racing, uncontrollable thoughts. And I had these confusing constantly negative feelings for a long time, and I didn't know to call it depression, anxiety. I hadn't been diagnosed or anything. I just knew everything's falling apart, and I don't get what's going on. And it was by the end of that, I had come to find that, sure, Swedenborg is an old, weird sounding thing, but the way that he describes reality and the way that he talks about how the mind works, it gave me the tools to climb out of that. And now I feel like I got to tell people about that.
Right.
Because I have a responsibility to let people know how cool and how relevant the material in there can be, and how much it can fill out and fill in the missing pieces of what you already understand about life. So yeah,
I remind people of the stuff we're going to talk about. Remember, this is being written in the mid 1700s. He was 53 years old. He'd basically done all this amazing stuff his whole life. Then something happens. He has these mystical visions. I mean, I'm not even 53. It's a long life. He's done all this stuff and written. And I'm trying to put myself in this guy's shoes. Also, and something I always love to do is kind of go and see who the doubters were back then, what they were arguing, and the people that tried to go after Swedenborg. It's interesting to read about Immanuel Kant, and they kind of acted like friends, and then he kind of secretly wrote this book saying he was insane. But at the time, people claimed he was insane. He's in the parliament. He's doing governmental, like, legit work. He clearly wasn't insane by the activities that he was doing. So the only real arguments I find from scholars at the time was just almost it felt to me like a jealous assertion. Like there was a little bit of jealousy among scholars, like, oh, this guy's insane, right? That's basically all they were saying, right?
It was just content. They couldn't critique the method because the books, he had written many books before he started writing about spirits and spirituality and that kind of thing. And the books that he wrote after these experiences were just as organized, and they just had as many accurate cross references, and he had them bound and published in the right way. He didn't lose his ability to do anything. One of the last things he ever wrote was a piece on Swedish currency, and he stayed involved in so you couldn't say, oh, he went out of control, he went out of his mind, he couldn't dress himself anymore. It was just the stuff that he talked about was so far outside the realm of the place he was in before. He wasn't talking anymore about anatomy. He was talking about the survival of consciousness after death. He was talking about the way that God works. And I do think with Kant and with some others, even if they were intrigued, you kind of had to say, well, he's crazy, because he was so uncool what he did in the scientific circles. He went from being well respected to, don't get like, you're all weird and spiritual now. So he gained some people's respect, lost a lot of it. He really sacrificed his career, I think.
Right.
But he didn't mind, because he felt like, nope, this is, not only is this more important, but this, he felt like this is what everything I learned has been building towards. It's not like he said, well, I was doing that science stuff and that's so dumb. The only thing that matters is religion. He's saying that everything that he learned about the way the human body works, for example, was the foundation so that he could understand how the spiritual things work. That this was, he saw that he was sort of being prepared in his life to be able to understand this stuff. He was getting the right kind of mind so that when he had started to have these continuous visions for the last 30 or 40 years of his life, he knew how to process it and write it in a way that a couple hundred years later, there could be some 18-year-old kid who's needing help with his depression, and I can pick it up and get something out of it.
So I always like to try to envision, especially this story, almost like a mini series on Netflix or something.
Yeah.
Swedenborg, I see this as a movie. This really happened. You know what I mean? So let's just take it from that perspective. Swedenborg, well-respected guy, suddenly has a vision. This, I guess it happens in a dream, right? The initial vision, what do you know about the initial vision that's sort of the catalyst?
Yeah.
It all starts.
If you're making that movie, which I want you to do, by the way, if I knew anybody at Netflix, I'd be like, listen, people are going to go crazy for this. I mean, there's period pieces.
People are going to question if it's real or not. And to be able to say this really happened, right?
Yeah. So, and if you were let's say you were the scriptwriter and you went in to try to make this, you wouldn't have to make anything up because everything is cataloged. So the period at which he had these spiritual experiences, he was keeping a journal, a travel journal, when that started. So traveling was a big deal back then, and it would take weeks, and you could die during it. So it was a big deal. So he's keeping track of, okay, I went to Amsterdam, went back to London for something, and in the middle of that, he starts to record his dreams. And this has been found since and republished as, sometimes it's called Emmanuel Swedenborg's Journal of Dreams, or sometimes Dream Diary. And he starts with, it's a fascinating read, and you can see in real time what I would call his spiritual awakening happen. And he starts with writing his dreams and then trying to psychoanalyze his dreams. Like, what does this, for example, he would see this black dog that kept appearing in his dreams, and he would say, I believe that this dog, and it became more and more convicted about all the symbols as he went forward. This is a representation, basically, this is of my pride, because he was better than everyone at everything, and really thought that he was, and this was getting in the way of his spiritual growth. So he kept having this dog appear in dreams. You know how dreams are; they're symbolic, and there's all this weird imagery, but you can tell it means something. You could say, like, I was in my house, but it wasn't my house at all, but I know it was my house. Like, it didn't look like my house, because you can tell it's telling you something. So he started to have these dreams. He started to write down what they meant, and this was way before there was Freud or there was any kind of psychoanalysis. It's one of the oldest records of dreams, and one of the oldest records of dream interpretation, I think, that exists. And the dreams got more and more vivid and more meaningful, and then they broke into what he called visions in full wakefulness. So they went from like dreams to in the hypnagogic state, when you're just kind of waking up and you can still sort of be in that dreamland, to you're having what we now call an out-of-body experience, or a vision, like you are having sensory experiences. And during that, he had what he called his spiritual eyes opened. So he said that everyone's got a spirit inside their body. You've got a spirit in a body, and you're like where the spiritual world and the physical world are joined together there. So your consciousness is spiritual and your body is physical, and the two are like interacting. It's not just connected in one point, like the pineal gland or something, but everywhere they're connected to each other. And so your spirit has the stuff that your body has. Like, you have spiritual eyes, just like you have physical eyes, but the spiritual senses are dormant right now because we're so focused on what's going on physically. But if your spiritual eyes open, you can actually see the spiritual world all around you, because your spirit's already there right now. So to him, spiritual eyes got opened up, and he began to become aware of the influence of the spiritual world on us. And that's the world that everybody who dies is living in, that world now. And so the influence of people who are there, as well as the meaning of life, to put it bluntly. And then he went out and believed he had this imperative to go write it all down. And he wrote like 30 volumes of really dense material, talking about everything that has to do with the purpose of life, the spiritual side of life, why we're here, the nature of religion and spirituality and God and revelation and everything in between, which ties together into this very complex but really comprehensive worldview that actually jives really well with a lot of modern stuff and a lot of ecumenical stuff, but doing it through the lens of how it is writing at the time. So it's a fascinating body of work.
So he's sort of given the power and ability to go anywhere he wants without limitation. He can travel to hell, he can travel to heaven, he can ask any questions, he'll be given the answers to. It's like he got that library card to the afterlife. And the perfect person to get it, somebody that's going to write this down. And so help us to understand Swedenborg's vision of the afterlife. When I'm reading Heaven and Hell and his descriptions of it, I'm fascinated, because I'm also a big fan of Neville Goddard, and who was also a big advocate of William Blake. And so, William Blake has this sort of tangential connection. I think he was raised Swedenborgian, or, they're obviously, when you read Blake, there's some influence there. And so it's this idea that God is a body and that the afterlife is inside of a gigantic body, that we're like organs in the body. I kind of got this impression that and there's different parts of the body that have their certain requirements. There's the heart and the kidneys, and people are living inside of this body, almost like cells inside of God's body. Was I wrong in understanding that concept? I mean, I kind of got that right.
No, that's I give you an A+. So,
all right.
But there's a few nuances to it. So what you're describing there is what he calls the grand human. He says that their patterns repeat at scale. So we are actually like a miniature version of the largest of the cosmos, and heaven, you can see it. He couldn't literally see it, but if you were God, you could see all of heaven at like a human form. And I don't think that necessarily means like the shape of it, like, oh, I've got to drive all the way from the thumb all the way down the elbow,
right.
But by function. So if you think about the role that all the different organs and things play in the body, you talk about somebody being in the liver, for example. The liver has the function of purification, so that whatever's in the bloodstream or in the body that's going to cause it harm, the liver can separate that out and make sure that gets put where it won't cause harm. So whoever's doing that, the group of people that are doing that in the society of heaven. So let's say that there's ideas or there's practices or something that's harming the whole. They would somehow be filtering that out, and doing that makes them analogous to the liver. Same thing with, for example, the eyesight corresponds to understanding. So whoever is gathering in new ideas and inspiration, centers of learning, that would be like you're in the eye of the grand human. And looking all together, the human body is an example of the spirit of heaven, which is like heaven itself. Heaven and hell are primarily states of mind.
Right.
Heaven is the joy that you feel in doing things that are constructive for other people, helpful for other people, the joy you get making other people's lives better. Hell is the joy you get in ruling over other people or harming them, somehow treating them badly for fun. Like that is what hell is. So the human form, if you think about if you imagine that one of your cells was conscious, what mindset is it in? So what it does is it works and works to do its job for the body. So if you are a liver cell, or let's say you're a skin cell, you're working, you're building proteins, you're firing, whatever you're doing that, and you're doing it, you're completely given what you have to the health of the whole, right? I'm firing away, making my little proteins or red blood cells or whatever. I'm doing that so that the body will be healthier. And at the same time, you're getting everything you need from the body. That if you are in the heart, you've got the rib cage protecting you, you've got the skin protecting you, you've got the immune system protecting you, you've got the bloodstream making sure you get oxygen and everything. So it's this, I'm giving everything I have to make life better for all of you. And since all of you are given everything you have to make life better for me, we are in the state that Swedenborg would call heaven, because that can actually be immensely fun and immensely peaceful and immensely joyful. So heaven is you're wearing like a little model of heaven. And so because that's the form that ultimately this desire to help other people takes at the grandest scale. So it's like a little bit like you're inside of a body. It's not like literally like a body shaped continent in an ocean somewhere, but functionally, that is, you could, if you really know your stuff, you can pick out, I think I'm like the lungs, I think I'm performing that function.
Right. So the fascinating thing going beyond that concept is that, as you had mentioned, that there's this demarcation that I'm serving others and moving outside of my ego and helping others is in that heavenly realm. Serving myself and dominating others and manipulating others is in that hellish type of realm. So we see it in our lives. We see it reflected in the world around us. Wars are just battles for self-domination, right? And then we see the I'm wondering if you just that little delineation, which is on the grand scale, we see it in our lives every day, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've been in heaven and in hell a couple times today, if you think about it.
Right.
Because in the way he describes it, it's not like it's about what your overall purpose is. So it's not like, for example, being in this interview with you. Of course, I want to seem like I know how to string a sentence together, and I want your audience to like me, right? I want to come off good.
Right.
But the difference is, what is that the whole reason I'm here? And if that's the entire reason I'm here, and I'll just like say things that I know aren't true or that could hurt someone, or I just don't, that's like a hellish way to approach it, because it's manipulating everyone in your audience and wasting their time to try to get myself to feel powerful and good, right? But if what I'm really here for is, I'm thinking about, I tried to, just before we were getting into this, I like to try to picture, okay, I'm just going to imagine somebody watching this and it really changing their life for the better. Because I know what it's like when you're looking for something. Just recently, I was looking for some information on how to give a good presentation, and I came across this book, and I was like, oh, I want to hear everything this book has to say, because it was just what I needed at the time. So I know what that feels like. Somebody looking for some spiritual stuff, I want them to get that feeling of, oh, this is exactly what I'm looking for, and I want it all. So if that's why I'm really doing it, if that's what excites me about it and what I'm gearing the things I say to was trying to do, then it's fine if at the same I have some level of concern of, okay, I hope they think I'm cool too. But as long as that's not what's driving it, and if I had to choose, I don't know how this would actually happen, but if in some theoretical way, if I could choose between actually helping the person or having more people think I'm great, if I chose helping the person, that would be an indicator of like, okay, that's the heavenly mindset. And it all has to, yeah, we all start with all kinds of inclinations towards negative stuff. This is why why do you have to stop kids from bullying each other? Why would they ever want to do that? You know how it feels to have someone make fun of you. Why would you want to make fun of? Why would there be any appeal in that? But it just, you can't keep them apart, because there's just this inherent, it's kind of fun. Like, it's fun. And that is like, we all have that sort of tendency towards good things, but also heavenly things or hellish things. This was what Swedenborg would say. And what we can do is focus over the course of our lives, kind of focus more and more on heavenly things, and try to push away hellish things. But nobody is going to stop you from making your life about whichever one you want to make it about. So if you, over the course of your life, are devoting your life to, if you just say, I don't care how the things I do impact people, I enjoy them, then that you can, no one can stop you from doing that. Swedenborg would call that being in hell, because you're going to make life miserable for other people, and ultimately you're making it miserable for yourself, because actual joy comes in realizing other people are people, doing things that are good. That's the lasting piece and everything. So that's what heaven really is. And you think about it in the body. If you're a cell that doesn't care what the rest of the body is doing, and you just want yourself and to replicate yourself, that's literally cancer.
That's
what
cancer,
it is.
right?
Yeah. So you could see it like that. Like, the body is where everybody's on board with this idea that, hey, we all want to work together to make everybody happy. And the opposite of that is, I want myself to be happy, and I don't care how that affects everyone else. That's the greatest good. So that's really the difference between heaven and hell.
Yeah. So he meets angels, and so help us to understand what an angel is and what he's experienced between angels and demons.
Yeah. Everyone that he calls angels or demons, they all are ex-people. So everybody, angel and demon, are just a state of mind that you can get in. I was saying, I go through heaven and hell all the time. So when you, in the world where you have a body and a spirit, you can kind of have a divided mind. So you can, as I was alluding to before, you can want to appear a certain way, but you don't really think that way. You can try to seem trustworthy to people, but you're not really trustworthy. Or you'll espouse some kind of virtues, but really it's just to get what you want. In this, when we die and you're just a spirit now instead of a body, it's much more stream of consciousness. Like, you don't have that filter in the same way anymore. And so in this life after death, Swedenborg observed that you go through this process where you really get clear about whatever it is you love and enjoy and act on above everything. that really becomes who you are. Like you can really, you get to be consistent in the face that you present to everyone and what you really love and enjoy and who you want. Like that becomes the same thing. So if somebody, it just gets clearer. It becomes clearer who everybody really is. And so people who are devoted to selfish pleasure and harming people, he calls them demons or Satans. And it's like demons is if you're sort of run by desires, like cravings to do things that are harmful. And Satan is a term he uses for people who are following false ideas, and that's leading them to do harmful things. And then angels are the opposite. That's you and me. If the most important thing in my life, if I was an angel, what I would be thinking about when I came into contact with you is like, I really like Brian a lot. Like, how can I make him happy? How can he's got this interview. How can I make this go smoothly for him? How do I serve his audience? And oh yeah, right. And I'm somebody too. Like, I'm really thinking about the impact that I have. And I've gone through the ups and downs of life and gained this humility so that I don't even like sneakily in the back somewhere think that I'm better than anybody else. And I've basically gone through spiritual growth or enlightenment or whatever it is to the point where I'm the basis of my life is I want to love other people. That's what an angel is. So when he would talk to angels, these are people who have gone through the journey that we can all go through. And when he would talk to demons or evil spirits, these are people who have gone through this process of devoting themselves to something negative. And the people that he talked to who are evil spirits, they would advocate for the life they have. He once talks to a couple people. He at the end of his book, Divine Providence, he says, "Excuse me for including this to fill out the rest of the page, because you're supposed to print ink on the whole page." So he's just kind of making a joke, right? And he says there's these two spirits from hell came and talked to him, and they essentially, the conversation goes, they're saying, hey, everybody in heaven is kind of lame, and it's really fun here in hell because we're allowed to do whatever we want, and we're allowed to hurt people if we want to hurt them. They're basically saying this is the life that we want, and he's trying to show them how that is harmful, and it's cutting you're not living nearly as full of a life as you could when you care about other people and you love them and all that. But it's not like the traditional Christian paradigm of hell is torture and heaven is reward. Hell is, in both cases, God is trying to let you live the happiest life you can based on what kind of things you love. So if you inherently, I enjoy harming people, there's going to be limits on what you can do because other people have to be protected. You're going to be frustrated sometimes, but that's what hell is. But heaven, when what you want to do is what other people want you to do as well, there's no limit to how much joy you can have and how much you can do together. So he was put on trial. His works were put on trial in Sweden because while they had a lot of Christianity sounding things in them, they were presenting a very different vision of what afterlife is. And at the time that was illegal. So he got in some trouble for that. That was another part of the pushback that he got, was his works were put on trial. He was pretty well connected, so he wasn't really in danger of being imprisoned or executed or something. But it was ideas that don't sound out of place now. For example, he said that you don't need to be Christian to go to heaven or to have this state of mind of heaven, that all religions can lead to that. Pretty much you got to say that now, or else people look at you like, what are you? But back then that was not in vogue, but I think he was a little ahead of his time there.
We'll put the trial on episode 5.
Yeah. I'm telling you, man, okay. And let me tell you the story of the greatest callback that Swedenborg says he met God, and that the first thing God said to him was an inside joke. So there was a time way before Swedenborg was any kind of spiritual guy. He was young and he was impulsive and he was really hot-headed. This is like the prologue I'm talking about right now.
Right.
And he was traveling across Europe from Sweden, I think, to London. And there was the plague broke out on the ship that he was on. So they had to quarantine in the harbor because in those days, just like, let's just sit there until the disease is gone. But he really wanted to get somewhere, and he's thought to himself, I don't have it. So he jumped ship. That's what I think where that phrase jumping ship comes from. He actually jumped off the boat and tried to sneak into the city, and he got caught. And he was, I believe, very close to getting executed for that, because you're not allowed to do that.
Right.
And and the reason why was he didn't have a clean bill of health, what's called a bill of health, which is a little paper that they would give you that says you don't have the plague. So fast forward all these years later, when he, in the middle of this Journal of Dreams episode that I was saying, when he meets God, the first thing I think that God says is, do you have a clean bill of health? And what he meant was, you've got, there's a lot of, yeah, sure, you're maybe not physically diseased, but spiritually, like you've got this ego stuff, we got to work through this stuff. But he was like referencing back to his, I just find that incredibly fascinating. Yeah. So I think that line could be delivered really well by whoever they get to be God,
Exactly. Well, so do we remember when we're in the afterlife, do we think we're still alive? What's his explanation of our conscious level in the afterlife? We all know we're dead.
Okay. You know that you're dead. You wake up as you, and you have your consciousness, and you even have access to your memory, and you're dead because people there tell you that you're dead. Mm-hmm. Okay. He talks about like a welcoming process, that there's actually a lot of love and care around when you're waking up to make sure that you are in a place where you're not going to be disturbed, and that you're slowly given the use of your spiritual senses and all that. And then you're told that you're a spirit, and you're offered any kind of aid that you want. You can forget, though. So when you're going through this process, it depends on what's your fundamental attitude toward the kind of heaven that we were talking about before. Like, what's your fundamental attitude toward loving others? Do you like self-centeredness and materialism, or do you like love of others? If you really don't like this spirit, for lack of a better term, spiritual kind of things, you can go into this kind of almost like willful ignorance, where Swedenborg would have to remind people, don't you remember when they told you that you were a spirit? Because they got so attached to superficial life that they didn't remember. And the reason for that is that everybody's got a will and an intellect. So basically, like what we'd call a heart and a brain. So your emotional, or your purposes, and then how you understand life and how you pursue those purposes. And it's really the will that makes you who you are. And this was something Swedenborg learned, and it was a shock to him, because he was a very intellect-oriented guy. He was very left-brained, and at the time, sort of Enlightenment thinking was really trying to say, look, it's all logic. But he found that actually your will ultimately shapes what your mind believes. That even if you get some information that's really pertinent, like, hey, you died, if you don't like the way the new world is, you can compartmentalize that away and just focus on whatever falsity you need to justify the kind of life you want to live. So if you're at all, unless you're trying to deny it, you're absolutely, that you're a spirit in the afterlife, and you bring yourself with you so that your personality stays. You are who you were before. You do go through a process where you get kind of like centrifuged down to you really find who you really are and drop some of this other stuff. And eventually your memory of this life becomes sort of dormant, where it's not popping up and you're thinking about it all the time because you're focused on the new world that you're in. But for the most part, you're more aware of how everything is and how everything works there. Everything's clearer. And it's not like a dream-like existence.
So what is Swedenborg's discussion of reincarnation?
Yeah, we did a show. It's called "Do We Reincarnate?" because there's some complexity to the answer. The basic answer is no reincarnation. Well, like you don't return in another physical body in the physical world. We made a whole show about it, though, because a lot of this stuff in reincarnation, the cycling through, the forgetting who you used to be, karma, and like actions carrying their own punishment, there are elements of that exist, but all within the spiritual side of life.
So you think you're going in the real life, but you're experiencing it in the spiritual world. You have memories of a past life, but those memories may be coming from the spiritual world.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. So I said before that we've got a spirit in a body, and our spirit is in the spiritual world. So the spiritual world is full of everybody who's ever died. So your spirit is actually around other spirits. And because spiritually, things like ideas and emotions can be shared, they can be broadcasted, which is, if you ever read like a near-death experience, they'll say, I was talking with someone, but they weren't talking. It was just telepathic communication, because they're like now sound waves can just travel, like thought waves can travel. You can actually, he actually describes in his books that at times the spirits who are around you, you can experience their memory as your own, which it would be his hypothesis for why you can have memories of past lives, but they're not your past lives. They're other people's lives, but you can experience them as yours. But the learning, some people who are talking about what's cool about reincarnation, and I definitely get some cool things about it. One is that the idea that you can keep learning. You keep learning and growing forever. And Swedenborg absolutely says that's true. He just says that it's a lot like, you're in the womb for 9 months, and there's a certain kind of formation of you that happens there, which then once you get born, you always have that foundation. If your hand doesn't form when you're in the womb, it never does. And with all the good things, like all the eyes and teeth and everything that formed in there stays with you, and you continue to learn and grow, but you don't go back into the womb. So spiritually, you continue to grow in and be perfected in love and wisdom. You get to be a better and better and wiser and more knowledgeable person forever, but you never go back to being physical. He even says that like each stage of life is like an egg compared to the next one. Like you're always about to go through what's great and transformative. And if we ever stopped learning and stopped growing, life wouldn't be fun anymore. It would lose its purpose. So there's always more because the divine is infinite. There's infinite things to learn, infinite ways to grow. So you're still doing that, but you're not doing it through coming back and having a body here and being broken back down into the mind of an infant and rebuilding there.
Right. So when people say they're seeing ghosts, or they report, or mediums report talking to somebody, what is actually happening?
Swedenborg talked to spirits all the time.
Right.
And he had a variety of kinds of spiritual experiences, but he was constantly communicating with spirits. And he kept a journal of his spiritual experiences. Like even after that dream journal I was talking about, he then for the next couple of decades, just every day would write down spiritual experiences he had. And there were all kinds, and that's really fascinating to go and read that. He didn't publish it, but it was published posthumously. And it's like the raw data behind everything that he writes. So he's always talking to spirits. And so the idea that somebody could be a medium wouldn't shock him at all. What he would say would be happening there is, if you're somebody who can hear or see spirits, that's your spiritual eyes opened and your spiritual ears open. So it's like a monitor that has a couple of different HDMI cables plugged into it, and you can do input 1 or input 2, and you can switch what signal you're getting. Right. So we can have those people can get input not only from the physical world, but from the spiritual world as well. So there's definitely a system in place that would explain the spiritual world is everywhere right around you. So it's just about being able to open your eyes to it.
So moving from that, one of the really fascinating things is he sort of wrote a book where he talks about seeing life on other planets in our solar system. Yes. And exploring these other this is interesting. So what do you know about that? And his discussion, of course, that there could be thousands of planets that have life.
Yeah, it's a confusing part of it to me, because he must have, either he got something wrong, or there, like, I can't see how could there be life on, let's say, the moon or Mars.
Right.
It just seems so inhospitable to it. And this is something that, so he says that, yeah, he talks about life on exoplanets or planets in the starry universe. But
Mhm.
I think that he never says that, oh, I saw the planets. He just says, I saw the spirits. And if you look in his journal of spiritual experiences, he's like, okay, well, because they did this and this and this, I could tell they were from this planet. I wonder if he just got that wrong.
Well, it's the same
Yeah.
as Edgar Casey said the same thing.
Did he? Yeah.
He talked about there being these life on the other planets that we can't see spiritually. Maybe it's happening on another quantum level.
Yeah.
And he's seeing it in a different, it's hard for us to fathom without our spiritual sight opened, right?
Yeah, it's a good point. And I've heard people say that. Other people are like, is it people that lived a long time ago? Were those planets habitable? Another time, I don't know, but it's fascinating that as he talks to these people, he calls them all human. He says
Right.
everybody on any planet is human, that human is not necessarily it's a biological thing. It's about having a will and understanding. So he describes these beings as, they're all humanoid, like they all look
Humanoid,
like
right.
people, but he'll say, oh, I got to see what they looked like, and they have, their faces are a little smaller and they're a little thinner, but they look a bit like us. And they're often actually, and now when we think of aliens, you think of like Independence Day, that movie, and they're
Right.
really technologically advanced. But the ones he was talking to seem to be simple and a lot more spiritually minded than we are. That when he talked about people from spirits from other planets encountering spirits from Earth, and always being a little shocked at how superficial we were. And that the grand human that I was talking about before, he said that like the spirits from other planets usually corresponded to or played the role of things within our mental processes, whereas spirits from our Earth were compared to or playing the role of like your skin or your fingernail, so like external sort of things. I just had this moment of like, this is why it's so hard to get people into Swedenborg, because here we are talking about this weird stuff like the spirits of the toenails and stuff. But yeah, so if somebody just like walked into the room of somebody who's watching this and like, oh no, this person's gone. But yet it's even the alien stuff.
It makes sense to me. I get it.
It's this commentary. It continues to be consistent commentary on what's important in life. It's really, his stories about aliens are really, we did an episode called The Spirituality of Aliens, because that's really what he's concerned with. Is not, he says a little bit about what he sees in their memories about how their planets worked and stuff, but it's mostly what do they value? What do they think is right and wrong? How do they worship? What's their religion like? That's the meaning of it. And he sees it as like, oh yeah, we're all very much part of one big family together. That in heaven, especially as you get to, he talks about levels of heaven. So this is levels of your mind. As more and more of your mind gets opened to this love and truth, you get to a place where everybody from all different planets are just totally intermingled, because it's like, oh yeah, you're my buddy, because we both can love the common good and try to do it well. So it's, and he says that's part of the plan, is that you can more fully fill out the human correspondence, because if you have 5 people playing the role of a hand in something, like let's say the hand is for grabbing and manipulating objects. So like in any organization, the hand would be the part that can go out and accomplish tasks for it. If you have, let's say you have a business and you have 5 salespeople, the hand is kind of like salespeople, that's okay. Right. But if you have 500 salespeople, you're going to sell a lot more stuff. And in heaven, and like if you have 100 scientists working on medicine, that's fine. But if you have 10,000, you're going to come up with a lot more amazing things. So everybody that goes into heaven makes heaven better, because now if let's say you're somebody who loves learning and you're like a part of the eye or the brain or something, you make the brain stronger or the eye stronger, because now there's more people trying to do that. Just like when you're a little baby, you have fewer neurons and cells and things. As those grow, you get to be more and more competent.
Right. So tell me what Swedenborg's position was about the effect of consciousness on our reality. You know, you hear thoughts create things and the law of attraction. I always kind of wanted to get what Swedenborg was saying about our effect on Earth, in the Earth plane, our ability to create reality.
Yeah. When I was younger, like a teenager or younger, I wanted to be a rock star. So I remember listening to music and thinking like, I'm going to be like this. I'm going to be like, but it never happened.
Right.
Like I was thinking about it. Before that, when I was even littler, I wanted to be in the NBA. I wanted to be a basketball player. And I was thinking about that. And obviously it turns out I'm short and not athletic. So there, I don't see that you can think and drastically change the world, but absolutely the principles that I see in the things you mentioned, that's how the spiritual world works. So the spiritual world, even the landscape around you is caused by the things in your heart and mind. So if you had a community of angels, of people, and there's a certain way that they see life, and there's certain things that they care about, there's certain like valuable spiritual truths they have in them, that would be reflected in the kinds of trees that grow there, the kinds of animals that are around there, the way the landscape looks, like the whole spiritual world, even that there is heaven and hell. That's not caused by like God came in with a bulldozer and like made that. That's people's minds creating that around them. So, and even like the way that distance works and time works spiritually, the more eager you are to see someone, the quicker your journey to go get them. Like space and time are relative there, and the more ideologically different or life purpose different you are from someone, the farther apart the communities that you live in are. So the thoughts become our reality. Thoughts create things. That's absolutely how the spiritual world works. Swedenborg didn't indicate that you have a lot of power to sway what's going on physically. He said that that's divine providence. So there's like this whole plan that's unfolding with and around the choices we make of how to lead everything that goes on for everyone to the best possible conclusion. But the sort of enlightenment he recommended was to get this perspective where you know that God is working things out for the best. And so when things go well, that doesn't make you think you're better than other people. And when things go poorly, it doesn't make you think you're worse than other people, but you know that somehow my life is making me into be just the right person to fit in somewhere to that heavenly body and be, because you think about how our experiences shape us. All this stuff, even my ability to go talk on our channel about spiritual things and stay interested in them. If it wasn't for the depression and the other things that I went through, I wouldn't have cared. I wouldn't have needed to delve into spiritual. You think I would have just sat around and read Swedenborg if I didn't need it to survive? Yeah. So because of that, I've gotten opened up to this thing, which I really love now, which is to try to think about the core, what's really going on in life and how do we make it so that life is better for everyone. And so my life has helped make me more and more in that direction. Who knows, like who I end up being, but things you can look back in your life and see it's shaping you into something. So your life is all working towards making you into the unique will and heart or mind and understanding, will and understanding that you are. Everybody's different. Everyone sees life a little different and feels a little differently. And it's by everybody's differences working in unison toward a common goal that you get perfection or heaven. So as far as like, could I use my thoughts to change life? Oh, I wouldn't even I want to get what's good out of life. I want to be for basically God, do what you need to do to get me where I need to go. It's not that I'm not trying to do things, but I can trust that even if this particular thing I didn't want to have happened, or something I wanted to happen didn't happen, I can have like a buffer where I know, okay, in the end, it's going to work out all right. That's the state that you can get. He called it being in the stream of providence, where you go around these things, but you're being carried ultimately towards happiness. That can give you the confidence and the grounding so that you can enjoy life instead of constantly be on like fight or flight about it.
Well, people would report he almost had a magical type of ability. He'd go sailing, and every time it would be completely smooth. He was in that flow of Providence, right?
Yes, it's true that sailors from records, the sailors would be like, oh good, Swedenborg's on this boat, we're going to make good time. It
Right.
did seem to cross in, and he was able to, there's some pretty well documented accounts of him having superpowers,
Right.
like
Visions and prophecies.
if you go to his Wikipedia page, it talks about what's called the Stockholm fire, which was one of the more famous ones,
right.
where he was at a dinner and he was suddenly looking very distraught. And people said, what's wrong, Swedenborg? And he said, there's a fire at my house, or in the town where I live. And the remarkable thing about that is where he lives was a few days journey away, and there's no phone or anything. So they didn't know if he was telling the truth. And also, how could you know? And then later that night, he said, it's okay. It got put out 2 houses away from mine. And so it's at some big dinner. So there's a lot of people there. They heard him say that. And then, by the time that the word reached them, it was as he had said. There was another case where there was she's a member of the nobility, and I think it was a queen, and she had heard that Swedenborg had these abilities. He started, by the way, publishing all these books anonymously. Right. It was only after he got sort of outed that people began to ask him things and invite him and say, can you do this? Can you do that? So, but he told this queen this secret that only her dead brother would have known. And she was shocked. And so word went out for that. There's a couple of things. There was another woman who had lost the deed to her house and was going to be evicted or something. And he told her where it was because he had talked to, someone who she knew who was dead, who knew where it was. So he did seem to have this stuff happen. He never said, you don't need that to develop heaven inside you. He doesn't really give you the steps to do it, but it does seem like, there's some perks. There's some perks that come with figuring out the spiritual thing. So while, I'm trying to be all Zen and like, okay, I'll just be cool with what happens. Hopefully things can happen better and better as we get a little more connected to heaven.
The amazing thing is he took pretty much every line in the Bible and wrote just gigantic interpretations. There's 73 books, something like that in the Bible. Can you imagine doing something like that? Are you aware of any of these interpretations? Is there any biblical interpretations that he had? For instance, the book of Revelation or in the book of Job or something that you found to be interesting?
I find them all to be interesting. And I'm kind of in the minority there because he started out, as you said, he was saying that, look, the Bible is not what you think it is. That this is written. Why is the Bible like it is? It's why is it confusing and it seems to be contradictory and it's got all this violence in it, and everybody knows the issues with the Bible. He says that this book is written in this universal language of what he called correspondences. This is the same language that you dream in, and this is the same language that ancient religions of all kinds were able to learn through nature before there was a written revelation. This is the language of the soul. And what I'm going to do is tell all of you how that works. I'm going to tell you what, for example, the creation story, what's that really about? What's the Noah and the flood? Did that actually happen? What's it about? So we started writing all this, and nobody bought those books. Right. Nobody bought it. It was some letter he wrote to someone where he said, I think we sold 4 copies in a month or something like that. So people started to want to know about the spiritual experiences. So that's when he wrote Heaven and Hell. And in Heaven and Hell, he's always linking back to this because he said, look, he called it the Bible, the Word. And he said, look, in the Word, everything you're looking for is there. This is an account of the spiritual growth process that goes on inside every person. It's also simultaneously, it's a detailed description of God and what God is like. It also tells the history of this human race's spiritual development and why things are the way they are. So he went in and told everything. I can give you a couple of examples of things I think that are interesting.
Yeah.
The creation story in the very beginning of Genesis. This is a huge point of contention for religious and non-religious people, because it appears to describe the creation of the world in a way that isn't how science is telling us that it happened. Swedenborg says that the creation story also has some problems with it. You get light created before the sun and the moon, and all the animals and all the plants are created in one day. And the ground that the plants grow in was at the bottom of the ocean just a few minutes ago. It just doesn't seem like it fits with the world that we know. He says that is the Bible is a description of your spiritual growth. So those are the days of you going from being without form and void to being somebody who's awake and understands your impact on other people. Like when God says, "Let there be light," that's the light that goes on in your mind when you first start to realize, oh, there's a difference between how my ego sees things and how they really are. When you can first see, like, you can be like, when I was in darkness, let's say when I was a teenager and I didn't care at all about how other people felt. I wasn't even thinking about it. I was thinking about myself. If I say this thing, yeah, it'll hurt that person's feelings, but people are going to laugh and that's going to make me cool. That's how I thought. Or if I go and snap the ornament off this guy's hood on his car, and my friends and I run away and we take it with us. That's so funny. You're not thinking at all about how that feels to walk out in the morning and realize somebody vandalized your car. So I was without form. I was void, right? I didn't understand that. But then the let there be light is this first dawning that, well, there's right and wrong, like outside of what's good or bad for my feelings in that moment. And then everything that follows there, the separation of the waters is that distinction of what's helpful and what's harmful. Then the plants and the first things that grow are, once we start to go through our first major crisis in life, and from that we start to look around for what's a spiritual path that can help me, because we need help. Like when I was first grabbing Swedenborg, like what can you do for me? And the says, well, you got to love everyone. Okay, I'm going to love everyone. Great. I'm going to go be nice to this person because I need help. So I'll do what you say. So that's like, it's like got some life in it, but it's just like plants. But then as sun and the moon get created, sun is love and the moon is what he calls faith, or your understanding of how spiritual reality works. Those start to, so now I'm at a phase where, oh, actually, I want to do good things because I'm excited about it, because I understand what it's like to be another person and I want to make their life better. And that's more like when this life starts to populate the earth. So that's a really quick summary of like this one of the levels of spiritual meaning of the creation story. And Book of Revelation is it's about the sorting that goes on in you, like in the spiritual world that I was talking about before. It's like the last judgment is a thing that goes on for all of us. Like we get ourselves ordered. And I just, the Garden of Eden, we're working on a show about the Garden of Eden right now. The Garden of Eden, the garden is your mind. And the difference between eating from the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, it's what you go to as an authority for how you understand life. So the tree of life was back when you had this direct experience. People used to have a direct experience of God and the truth. You didn't need to like look in some weird book or watch a YouTube video. It was just, you can tell, you get direct contact, you get visions, you just consent. You wouldn't have to stop kids from bullying each other because you can just tell that's not the right thing to do. But the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is, I'm going to just pay attention to my external, like how things kind of feel in the moment, and worldly superficial stuff. That's going to be what I eat or what I go to for the authority. Like that's how I'm going to form my worldview. And once we started doing that, you destroy the Garden of Eden, which is this state of like the love and the innocence, how people should be, how you feel like they should be. So there's this whole story about why life is the way it is and why we start, and that's all in there, and trying to bring that out is endlessly fascinating to me.
Yeah, the Bible is about you.
Yeah, what else would it be about? Why does it matter if I'm sitting here and I'm living a life and I'm hurting and I need help? I don't need God to tell me about geology and tell me like this is how the world was made, or I don't need him to tell me about Noah, and I don't need him to tell me about how some people walked around in the desert with a box. How is that helping me? Like,
Yeah.
how is that? That's what it's like. How if God is like your parent, you're like, hey, I need some help. Well, let me tell you this old story that has nothing to do with you. That's not help.
No.
That's not good. It's got to be about you, and it's got to be about everyone always. Why is Moses more important than you are or me? It's got to be about everyone always, or else that wouldn't seem like that's what God would say to you. So the Bible is about you, and it's about the process you can go through to get to, because the seventh day of creation is when it says God rested. That's when we get to be in this state of when you're like a cell in the body, when you just want to do good for people and you love the good that's coming back. God is resting there, not because he's done with us, but it's because, oh yeah, we're aligned now, and we're on the same page, and we're on the same team, and there's a relaxation of let's go do good things together. That's like the seventh day we're trying to get to.
I love it.
Yeah.
Curtis Child, it's been so much fun to talk to you about Swedenborg. Everybody needs to check out Off the Left Eye, an amazing channel. You discuss so many more topics, and you could talk about this infinitely, just infinitely. If I was to read an hour-long, really fascinating, just for the channel, what would you recommend? The one about the planets?
The Other Planets is great. I know you said you were reading Heaven and Hell some. There's some really cool descriptions of what the state of mind is in heaven there, like the innocence of heaven, the peace of heaven. There's a couple of good ones back to back there. So I would recommend, probably that, to give people, because that gives you a sense of what it's all for. Like, what's the point of life? What's to get you to this place where you're just like profoundly happy, because that's why there even anything exists. So I'd say that's a pretty good one.
Very cool. So thank you so much for coming on, and we're definitely, as I learn more and delve more deeply into this subject, I'm gonna have to bring you on again, and we'll talk about it further. So
I would love to, and I want to say thanks for having me, and thanks for doing what you're doing. I think your channel is doing a lot of good for a ton of people, and I hope that they had fun today, and keep doing you.
Thanks, man, and welcome to the Reality Revolution.